Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Roisin Inglesby, and I'm one of the curators here at the William Morris Gallery. We're delighted to invite you here this evening as part of London Craft Week. And I'm very, very grateful for our partners in this event, the Japan Foundation, who very generously enabled our chair, Tomo Yoshizawa, to be here and have sponsored this event. So thank you very much to our partners, Japan Foundation. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to what is going to be, I hope, a really fascinating and interesting panel discussion this evening. Many of you will probably have already seen the Mingei exhibition, but for those of you who haven't seen it, we're open until 9 o'clock this evening, so please feel free after the discussion to stay, have a drink, have a look at the exhibition. And all the galleries are open. There's a 10% discount in the shop, and the book is on sale this evening for £30. I mentioned the book here. The reason that we're here this evening, in part, is to launch this book, which is related to the Mingei exhibition. The exhibition and the book are they're compatible, but they are kind of standalone products. And I was really keen with the book to try and introduce the broader aspects of Mingei and to think about what it means from a variety of different perspectives. Some of you will know a lot about Mingei. Some of you might be coming to it for the first time from a sort of more British craft perspective. But one of the really interesting things about Mingei, a little bit like William Morris himself, is that it means different things to different people. And the Mingei movement has its origins in early 20th century Japan, but with a huge influence from Korea and other parts of the East Asian periphery to Japan. It's traveled across East Asia and Britain, America, and further afield throughout the course of the 20th century. And then in the 21st century itself, Mingei has taken on different meanings for different people. And the word Mingei, I think, has quite different resonances in the English-speaking world and in Japan itself. So the exhibition and the book are by no means an attempt to define Mingei strictly. It's much more about asking questions about this word, about this phenomenon, and about how it is incorporated into our lives, both historic and contemporary, than it is in finding answers. And as a result of that, I really was keen that the project has a variety of different perspectives. So the panel here tonight really reflects that diversity of approach that we've been keen to foster throughout this whole exhibition project. So I'm delighted to introduce from my right, your left, Yuko Kikuchi, who is the head of academic programs at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Those of you who know anything about Mingei from an academic perspective will know that Yuko basically wrote what I consider the Bible on Mingei from an English language perspective. Her book on Japanese modernism and Mingei theory has been incredibly helpful at thinking about Mingei from a historical perspective and also critically analysing it in the context of international politics and the socio-economic changes that were happening in Japan in the 20th century. Next to Yuko is Angell, who is an artist, sculptor, specialises in ceramic sculpture. He's also director of Troy Town Pottery and is interested in Mingei from a practitioner's point of view, which is something that I felt was very important to bring into the understanding of the exhibition and its interpretation, because Mingei is about makers, and there is so much about Mingei that is from the perspective of a kind of theoretical, non-making sort of critical point of view, that it's easy to forget the makers who are at the heart of Mingei. And then next to Aaron, we have Dasom, who is assistant curator of Korean arts at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Dasom, back in Korea, was instrumental in reintroducing Mingei to a Korean audience. As I'm sure many of you know, Mingei starts in Korea. In the early 20th century, Korea was a Japanese colony, and it was in the encounter with Korean ceramics and Korean culture that really sparked the interest in Mingei of Yanagi Muneyoshi and Bernard Leach and others. And so it's incredibly significant to have the Korean perspective on this engagement with the arts. And Dasom has been incredibly helpful in helping us interpret what Mingei means from a Korean perspective, both historically and in the modern world. And then next to Dasom, we have Tomo Yoshizawa, who is chairing this evening's events. Tomo is a cultural translator and interpreter. She is a tour guide extraordinaire, a very, very talented translator, and has been my absolutely essential partner in creating the exhibition from the Japanese perspective. Not only is she an expert in contemporary Japanese crafts and writes a column about contemporary Mingei for a Japanese national newspaper, but she also comes from a family of craftspeople. Her grandfather, Munehiro Rikezo, was a living national treasure in Sumugi silk weaving, and there are 2 examples of the work of the Munehiro workshop upstairs in the exhibition that I'm sure you will have noticed if you've seen it. So Tomo will be chairing the panel. It'll be about 40 minutes or so with the speakers, and then I really hope there will be some time for questions and some open discussion with you all. In terms of housekeeping, if there is a fire, the doors are here, so fire exits there. It's not rocket science tonight. We are filming the event, and I hope that's all right. There is a disclaimer about that. And at the end, we have some questionnaires over at the table by the special exhibition gallery door. I'd be very, very grateful if you were able just to fill in a survey. There's a QR code and then just a couple of questions, which would be really helpful for your feedback so that we know what we can do better and what we're doing well for our audiences. So with that, I will hand over to Tomo, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Roisin, for the kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. I am Tomo. I'm really pleased to be here, to be sharing this space with you on this such beautiful evening and talking about Mingei, which has been a very important philosophy. My birth. Should I turn up or stand up? Or should I do both? So it's my absolute pleasure to be here with you all. And yes, Mingei has been a very important philosophy in my life. And actually to be sharing that with everyone here, it's my great honor. And I helped Roisin research Mingei last year. And I didn't expect me to be here in this space 1 year after. So it's my absolute pleasure. And Mingei exhibition, as she said, and this book is all about, as she explained, sort of giving broader interpretation what it is, what it means now today. So I'm not here to kind of define what Mingei is. That being said, Yuko, you told me earlier on that you spent yesterday just once again revisiting Mingei and defining what it means, how it started. So I think it's just a great way to start this evening, what you found today. And I would say you are the only Japanese academic person who can put Mingei in a sort of international context and who can actually speak to the international audience. So if you could, with your definition of Mingei, how it started, and if you could explain to us how you found yourself in where you are right now, that'd be great.
Thank you very much, first of all, Roisin, that extraordinary skill you have that coordinate all these different perspectives and then gathering of all these people in here to have a discussion. That's really wonderful. And I can't stand it. So I've got lots of books. Yes, okay, yeah. And it's a great honor that to be called, I've written this Bible. And thank you for such a generous introduction. And thank you very much, Tomo, for chairing this tonight's panel. I just suggested to Tomo that because we have got millions of different interpretation about Mingei, which is I really endorse, and then that's what I'm really expecting to hear more tonight. But before that, maybe we can start with the 1926, when this Yanagi Soetsu, the theorist and also the founder of the Mingei movement, how he wrote about and how he defined the Mingei. So he started writing writing about what is Mingei in 1926. That was a very short article, and then it was about the ordinary things and also miscellaneous objects, which you found in the kitchen and living room. That's the kind of definition he started. And then from 1926, he's building more and more and theorize in a very clear way what Mingei is. And 1927 and 28, he wrote a big thesis titled Way of Crafts, which is unfortunately not translated into English, and only one small part was sort of adapted and kind of translated by Bernard Leach, but that's just very small part of it. So this is a very key in Japanese way of craft or koge no michi. He defined the Mingei as in a 12 kind of definition, which I have to advertise my book, but because he wrote in a very long narrative manners, I had to summarize in 12 definition. So first definition, which is very obvious, handmade things. And second one is that object has to have an intimacy to your life. And third one has to have a function and usefulness. And fourth one is a bit abstract, but it has to be a healthy object. This is again something not healthy or sick. And another one, fifth one is a natural thing. So it has to be made of natural materials. And has to have a simple forms. So it is to do with the beauty of simplicity, which has to have. Then also has to have a traditional beauty. So it has relate to some traditional skills or traditional way of appreciating. And another one is very abstract, irregularity, which is like it's not a perfect symmetry. It has to have some human irregularness in it. That's the eighth definition. And ninth is has to be inexpensive, affordable. And 10th is not one-off object, it's plural. So there are similar ones made in quantity. And 11th is the maker's position. It has to have sincerity and honesty, and on behalf in terms of the maker's position. And that maker's position is also very important on the 12th definition. You have to have selflessness, and then you don't seek for fame. So anonymity is really to define this Mingei object. So in that way, he in 27 and 28, in this thesis or way of craft, he defined very clearly in his terms. But also he started to talking about in religious terms. This is a Mingei object is not like a high priest, but it is the devotee, the believer, ordinary believer who is protected by God. So this is something of a religious thing which he developed further in connection with Zen later. That is after 1950s. Now, so 1927 and 8, this thesis is not translated, but 1931 and 1933, he further wrote an article about what is Mingei. Really, the title is What is Mingei and why it is important. And then that is translated in here. This is a very useful book, published in 2017. And Michael Brace is a translator. And this is far better than Leach's adaptation of Unknown Craftsman in 1970s. So in the first chapter, what is folk craft and the beauty of miscellaneous things? These are two first chapters. coming from this 1931 and 1933 sort of really digest of 1927-28 thesis. So really recommend this if you really want to know how Yanagi phrased it and how he defines this Mingei. This is what I really wanted to start with. And then I also was struck by what he explained, this definition. He also said, like, this is a proposition of paradigm change. This is really, I didn't really read it when I was writing this book, but now it really, it feels really meaningful right now. When we think about Mingei and when we really think about what's the relevance of Mingei now, it is a lot of things about is a paradigm change. And so maybe we and everybody can talk about this and further.
Thank you. So I can obviously feel your passion towards Yanagi's philosophy. And I guess if I may just add one little question to what you just said. You said that book in your hand is so much better than Bernard Leach's adaptation. In what way do you think that's more true to Yanagi's, what Yanagi wanted to really communicate in terms of translation?
Yes, Michael Brace is a professional translator, and so he really word by word translated Yanagi's writing of that 1931 to 1933, whereas that 1970s Unknown Craftsman, it is a very interesting thing what Bernard Leach did, but because he's not a Japanese fluent speaker, so he had to go through Hamada Leach and Hamada Shoji, and then so two translator and then a true brain's understanding and interpreting the Yanagi's word. So it came through like a black, box, and then very creative, writing. Yes,
creative
at the end.
interpretation.
It's not really a translation, but it's a really like cultural adaptation of that Yanagi's thoughts.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So Bernard Leach has been mentioned. Now I would like to ask you, Aaron. I think you are the only one who works with your hands, making things part of your art. And also you practice at Bernard Leach pottery, and you also been to
very briefly.
Briefly, okay.
And I wasn't throwing then either. I was the Tate artist in residence, but it was hosted by the Leach. But I was surrounded by potters, so I kind of got into it then.
Is that where you encountered Mingei?
It was something I knew about. I think I'm not sure if that version of the Yanagi book was out yet, The Beauty of Everyday Life, but I definitely had some awareness of kind of Yanagi's writing, but not much really. All of the throwers there at that time, the younger guys especially, were super into using Mingei as a term, kind of daily, and I think that was probably the influence of Roloff Us, I can never remember how to pronounce his surname, who is still the head potter at the Leach. But when he came in, he kind of wanted to bring a much kind of more wholemeal warmth kind of back to the standardware and back to what they were producing there. So he was throwing out lots of references to these people who were training as potters, a lot of which were incorporating Mingei. And he's South African, so he was doing that in an international way already at that point. Yeah.
And how do you find yourself in the other person who creates, who also directs? And in this book, you also have like sort of, I can feel that you're not, completely immersed in a Mingei philosophy. You have your own stance. And how do you find yourself in relation to Mingei philosophy as an artist?
I mean, I'm completely untrained as a kind of craftsperson, so I think maybe was in more of a position to write the essay I wrote, because it's not something that I think Mingei is not something that's been super important to me as a kind of guiding principle, but I think it is interesting how it's kind of emerged into definitely the intersection of craft and art in recent years as a kind of sort of a philosophy of living more than a philosophy of making, with some quite bad results. But that's why in my essay I kind of focus on this really late period of Yanagi, or at least I started the essay with that, which is this quite strange essay he wrote called The Vow of Non-Discrimination Between Beauty and Ugliness, which was sort of, it's late and it feels late. It's sort of him trying to distill the idea of the Mingei object down to this really kind of pure sort of thingness that first attracted him to the object, this kind of unknowable spirit in like the Kazaimon tea bowl, for example, or something like that. And you can see he's really struggling. Like even at that point, it's like, oh yeah, you died not knowing what Mingei was, and you kind of invented it. He seems to. There's a really interesting kind of like tension there, and a lot of stuff about kind of the Buddha field and Pure Land Buddhism, which is like too kind of academic and theosophical for me, but like
yes,
yeah.
The philosophical aspects of Mingei and also tangible object as a Mingei, and I think it's important to mention that Yanagi was first into sort of mysticism and how he was drawn to William Blake first, and he went into explore this Mingei field, and yes, to later in life he read that vow of non-discrimination and how he felt like something he was searching aesthetically was somehow represented in a sort of philosophical way, and I wonder which came first, like the idea or aesthetic, but it's always interesting to sort of explore that. It's also holding paradox as well.
Yeah, it's very, very paradoxical.
Yes.
And it's quite in contrast with a lot of Mingei was about retail at certain kind of points, and it really contrasts with that, I think.
Anybody want to add to this? Okay, I should just carry on because I haven't introduced you yet. So, Dasom, you I think what I would like to, how did you meet Mingei? But also you are you're specialized in contemporary Korean ceramics, and some academics say that Joseon pottery gave birth to Mingei ideas over a century ago. So now that you are looking at the sort of contemporary production of ceramics in Korea, and how you saw the evolution of crafts culture in Korea, and also how you came into this, how you met Mingei and how you found yourself here today.
Yeah, so for me, it's a bit difficult to say that I like how I discovered Mingei. Because it was part of my, not quite sure it was high school or first year at the university, but it was part of my mandatory art history class about Korean art history. So this is how much influential Yanagi and Mingei movement to Korean art history. So as you may already know, Yanagi left lots of writings on Korean art, and then from his love of the Korean art, and then because his writing was a bit abstract and poetic and somewhat religious, and then from his early writings, he mentioned about Korean aesthetic as beauty of sorrow or beauty of lines. And then those kind of words were, now we understand that it was purely from his own interpretation without any concrete evidence. So, and then when you read the Yanagi's writings and then see, like for example, like White Munja, and then see it like as a beauty of sorrow from the object, or like see the curvy lines and then see, oh, it's like the beauty of the lines, and then that's how you accept his ideas. But because like the art can be viewed from like the viewer's subject feelings, however, like the historians can't really do those kind of things. So the historians really need to find the evidence. And then because the Yanagi's writings were abstract. It's a bit difficult to disprove his ideas. So the early Korean art historians were really put a lot of effort to like correct or break through those kind of prejudices, and then try to build some Korean art history within the Korean narratives, and that's how incorporated into Korean art history. And then answering to your second question, so the Mingei ideas has been actually kind of developed into Japanese colonial government's policy towards Korean craft policies. So the Japanese government wanted to develop some traditional or local craft in Korea, and then they found some silverwares or ceramics to develop for the souvenirs, touristic souvenirs. And then those kind of traditions went on to after the liberation of the Korea. So like the Korean government also do those kind of finding Korean traditional things and then develop those kind of souvenirs from the traditional crafts as well. But it was a bit like a very thin streamline in talking about the Korean craft history. So there, like, I can just like vaguely say that there was a traditional Korean craft, and then after the Korean War, many Korean professors went to study USA or Germany or the UK to learn the new skills and techniques and finding ingredients from the Western technologies. So, and then when they came back, they were quite armed with the Western ideas, and then the expressive sculptural ceramics or craft objects. So that has been taught in the Korean universities, art universities, and that's how the Korean contemporary craft, like very special, like specified genre has been invented. And then, so the traditional craft has been continued, but it was mostly succeeded by the intangible cultural heritages. So I can say, yeah, there are two strands in Korean craft. One is contemporary Korean craft, and then the traditional one.
Thank you. That's something I wasn't really aware of. And the influence from Korea and China to Japanese ceramics is, huge. And knowing that how Korea has actually took a different path after the war, it's interesting. And also how you described Yanagi, how he was like abstract, and it is hard to describe what Yanagi was, and is it the philosopher, founder, theorist, and he took liberty of doing many things by just being Yanagi, and that probably allowed many interpretations to his words. And on that note, Yuko-san, would you like to add how on the note how Mingei is interpreted broadly, and how do you see it as a good or bad, or is it inevitable?
Yes, it is very inevitable to have a different interpretation of the Mingei and the Mingei theory, and as Dasom really, clearly explained that this colonial art situation has been very difficult for both countries because they were not talking, and they have got a completely different parallel discourse about Korean art. And only the last 2 decades or so, can I say this? Some academics and makers started to talk each other about this colonial situation and redress this histories, not the Japanocentric view of this Joseon art, nor Korean, centric art, but together to work on this colonial modernity and colonial art situation. So for Japan, and especially for Japan, this post-colonial situation, to interpret this Mingei and Mingei theory in 21st century is very important for the decolonial process. And Yanagi's theory of this beauty of sorrow has been too long very influential in the museum's classification to the way they appreciate the Korean Joseon pottery and so on. So they have to also change all these, cataloging, and then also the wording describing whole Korean potteries in Japan, and as well as this scholars community has to really change the way to look at it. When I was writing this book, I went to Korea, and then it was such a difficult time for both sides. So immediately when I started talking about Mingei, and I said I want to know about Korean perspective, but the first thing I heard is, you colonizer, go home. We don't want to talk about this. So, but now I'm really feeling more, really productive and then meaningful to talk about Mingei as an engagement point. And Korea is not only one. The Taiwan is another one. The Mingei movement went to Taiwan and then had got quite a lot of involvement with the local art historians, also making that Japan-centric way of making Taiwanese colonial art. So this is the same thing. And then internal colonization, if you talk about the Ainu culture and then Okinawan culture, these are the things also we need to discuss together to redress this history. So
Definitely that's not done much inside Japan, and I think this is why this exhibition is so meaningful, because it's seen that in an international historical context, and not to argue about it, but just to see it. There's different way of looking at Mingei, and as a Japanese person, this has been very eye-opening. Yes, and I guess redefining what Mingei can mean in today's world. And in Japan, there has been definitely a resurge of Mingei movement, and I hear that in Britain as well, especially after the pandemic, many people are drawn to crafts. And Aaron, I'd like to throw this question to you: how Mingei can be useful, or maybe not useful at all in today's context?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people got into it. I think the pandemic was interesting because it sort of skewed people's sense of time a little bit. People took up endless ill-advised hobbies during that period. Pottery strongly represented there, which we've profited from that. But yeah, I don't know. It's funny because that kind of homemade, kind of homespun, wonky, very, very kind of humanistic, slow to make kind of style of pot, which you might associate with Mingei. Although there's I think it's a bit unfair, because I think there's a lot of stuff which would have been identified as Mingei, which was really kind of factory made, but the factory was people. It's not all that kind of singular object. Those were the ones which were kind of elevated. Like the story of Yanagi's writing about the Kizaimon bowl, for example, is this object that comes from mass production as a kind of mistake. It's like the worst of the lot that kind of comes out of it. And then what happens in the 30s, this pottery I'm talking about, in the kind of Momoyama revival, as we would call it, where that people started to deliberately make that one bowl that failed the firing, and everyone's knocked down their big anagama, knocked down their big kilns, built much smaller ones to produce these bowls. This was because there was a resurgence in kind of Chanyu and the tea ceremony at that time as well. But I think that kind of spirit of this kind of strange singular object, it sort of already existed within art. I think painting is strange. I think kind of modernist painting is strange. You have these kind of like funny objects which are kind of anti-industrial, and a long history of that within art practice. I think what's happening with Mingei is this kind of anonymizing tendency. which I think is often not that beneficial for individual artists because everyone's work kind of tends to blur together a little bit. But this idea of producing an object as a distinct individual maker, which has this spirit of this kind of eternal, anonymous maker, is a strange foray for artists. It's I don't know what the point is. Like it's
especially in today's context.
Yeah, but I think this is really interesting because it's quite an arch thing to do. Like, and you know they often are kind of making things which are identifiable as a person. But I think with something like craft with a small c, like people kind of will start learning how to do something. They'll kind of get competent kind of a year into it, and then we'll maybe start showing these works. At that point, everyone's work kind of looks the same because everyone's sort of at the same level and hasn't kind of developed yet. And I think we're seeing that as a kind of discrete aesthetic in the art world a bit. Does that make sense? Like it's this slightly not ready to show yet style of craft within art. And I mean craft with a small c. All art has craft with a small c in it.
I'm not sure if I understood that 100%
I
right.
don't understand it either.
But your comment made me think of one word, material intelligence. And with that said, I like to just kind of put you in a spot. I think material intelligence, like once you start working with, there's something that you can only know when you actually work with it. Quality of throwing, quality of bows or stitches, and this. I think material intelligence is something I resonated with William Morris's philosophy. Is there anything you like to add to that, or am I out of context?
So material intelligence, I cannot claim that as my own term. That's something I've learned from Glenn Adamson, who's one of the best writers on craft. But I think it's this idea that most of us these days have absolutely no idea about the things that we use or make or eat, and we're so alienated from those processes. And you know, one does not have any sense of kind of materials. You know, we buy things, we don't know what they're made from, who makes them, the processes that go into making them, and it's this alienation from materials that can be considered sort of at the root of some of our social problems, particularly exploitation of labour and throwaway culture, where it's much easier to throw something away if you have no idea about the processes that are involved in it. And I think maybe part, at least to speak to Aaron's point, is that this is part of the problem with this kind of weird, not very good craft art, is that we're, as an audience, so alienated from what is intelligent in materials that it's maybe easier for artists to kind of present the public with something, and because none of us actually know how to make with our hands in any meaningful way, it kind of, there's a mysticism that gets attached to anything which a couple of 100 years ago people would have understood as being kind of the sort of product of, you know, a reasonable amount of skill and knowledge. But it's not rocket science, but to us it is, because we collectively have so little understanding of the materials that we encounter in everyday life. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, that is put much better than I thought.
Thank you.
So I was teaching in a college, small college called Kanazawa College of Art until last October, before I took the job in V&A. And there's a big craft department in there. And then students all said that they want to make rice balls and miso soup bowl for daily use. That's their ambition. And then, so they really, you know, the key word for them is everyday use and everyday beauty. And when you ask them, have you ever touched clay or have you used any tools? They have never touched, and then they even can use the scissors as well. Those people really had got some kind of strange idea about making, you know, from some kind of with material intelligence they don't have, And their ambition is not becoming artists. They said they don't want to become famous people, but just want to make a daily useful things. That's what they are aiming to when you're coming into art college. So I just found it so very peculiar.
A start. Good word. Okay. Okay. I think coming to almost wrapping up this conversation, and I think this Dasom from you, I think what Yuko touched on earlier on is something that we shouldn't really dismiss, and how century ago how Yanagi idealized certain object, and people can only know what they know in that time or period, in that environment they're in. But now that we are now in 21st century, are able to look back the history of Mingei and what context back then, and now we are able to have much more international, broad perspective of looking at Mingei movement, how it's evolved and how it's influencing us today. Do you have any thoughts on what we can take away from Mingei and can make better use of it in today's society, or what we can maybe discard?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's very actually interesting point that the Mingei is like keep reviving and then keeping its voice. Yeah. And then what's interesting for me is that it, like, the Mingei aesthetics and theories are quite echoing to the Western modern design ideas, like simple in form and utilitarian object and less decorative, and it's very strange, like those kind of two ideas from totally different regions are happening at the same period. And then yeah, I am also experiencing that, like speaking of the Munja again, so it has been popularized by the second half of the 20th century, and then we are seeing the emergence again, like in recent years. So I feel that people are again craving for those kind of aesthetics, and then I agree to Aaron about like the changes happened during the pandemic, and then all of my craft artist friends were quite surprised that, oh my god, people are buying my things without seeing it or touching it. So that was quite surprising things. And then from my personal experience, adding to Aaron's the anonymous thing. So from our collection, when you see the cataloging things, many of the objects are recorded, the maker are recorded as unknown person, and it's not because this object is not very well made or the maker was not skilled, but they just did not leave any signatures, and it was I think we had different approaches or notion regarding the authorships of in the West and then East. So if Yanagi unintentionally or intentionally picked up those kind of differences between East Asia and then Western cultures, that would be very, well done thing. And then, I see the Mingei theory still rings to us importantly, because in contemporary world, like, we are quite distant from the traditional things, but like Yanagi mentioned, how we could still convey those kind of traditional ideas to the contemporary world. Like, for example, this cup was just not made in this form, and then it was just made through the historical ideas, and then this is the result of all those kind of trials and errors, and then made into the final form. So that's how we understand the traditions and then all those kind of previous ideas. So in the sense, I think, Mingei ideas could be still, exist today.
there's value in learning from the past because people, somebody who came before us made the same mistakes and learned from it. So why not, get lesson from it? Yes. I think there's one, you talked about anonymity, which is supposed to be the one significant aspect of Mingei. And just one little interesting learning that I did recently, I'd like to share with you. One of the founding members of the Mingei movement, the Kawai Kanjiro, is a famous potter. And people criticized him. One of the main arguments in Mingei is why Kawai has his own signature in his pot when Mingei products supposed to be all anonymous. In Kawaii's, I got to hear Kawaii's granddaughter's words for it, and recently that because Kawai was very, he studied technical aspects of Chinese ceramics, Korean ceramics, and he was able to emulate it so well. And because he had so much reverence for this original object, he actually decided to put his name on it so that people won't mix it up from the real original. So that's actually like another take of what anonymity can be, and just different way of looking at what it means to put your name on objects. Okay. We touched on so many points, and I hope some of it resonated with you.
And thank you very much for coming.